Right. Welcome, David. Thanks so much for coming on with me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, tell us about yourself and your role. What does your day-to-day look like?
Okay, well, I'm the CEO of HUBBED, and I founded the business about 10 years ago after I left Microsoft, where I was for about 15 years before that. A lot of focus on technology and retail, really, in that previous role. So when we started HUBBED, the focus was really on how do we create a retail network and leverage the sort of technology experience that we had previously. So that's how we started the business, and over the 10 years, it's evolved in many different ways, but my role has constantly changed. I would say at the moment, my role really falls into about 4 or 5 key areas. The first is setting vision for the team, and I think that's really important because I need the team to believe in the vision that I have and that we have had, which has evolved over time. So setting that vision and getting buy-in from the rest of the team. It's all very well saying, I run a business, you must follow this, but it's much better if the team actually believes in where you're going and what the opportunity is. And then really defining strategy with the management team, which falls on the back of the vision. How do we actually get there? What are the things we need to do? And then how we're going to achieve those things. The third thing I do, it sounds like the reverse, but I focus very, very much on what I don't believe my competencies are and make sure that I have good people around me to solve for those issues. And so I manage a very strong team of people who are just a lot better than I am in key functions of the business. So our operations, our logistics team, the guys who actually build our technology, the team who drive sales and marketing, our back office teams, very highly competent. So my job is to really manage the relationship and manage that management team so that they're realizing the potential that we believe the business has. Then after that is stakeholder management. It's managing my board, it's managing key customers, key partners, managing external relationships to keep the business moving on. And then the final thing I say is my job is to fix problems. I really look at that as dealing with the things that are getting in the way of others being able to deliver their work. And so my job becomes quite varied because the problems are different. And I just focus on sort of removing those problems and those issues for them. That's my day to day. Very different every day.
Wow. How do you compartmentalize all that? How do you unwind at the end of the day and actually figure out what you're going to do the next day?
This has evolved over time because especially at the beginning when everything was incredibly frenetic and we were just making more poor decisions than good ones and spending most of our time just fixing the mistake we made last time. I worked out that I needed to be quite regimented with myself. So I get up about 5:30 in the morning. I go to Vision Personal Training. I have a trainer there I see 5 days a week. I'm either in a group class or I'm in a PT class. I also box on a Saturday, and then I run and walk the bay with my wife on Sundays sometimes. So I get up very early. I do that. I do exactly the same thing driving into work. I love driving into work. I'm either listening to music or a podcast. And I'm typically listening to something that I think is going to help me with a particular area that I'm struggling with when I listen to podcasts. I come into work every day and I start with a clean piece of paper and I write down the 4 or 5 things that I'm planning to achieve for the day. I encourage the rest of the team to do it. And then I focus on crossing those things off as I've done them. Doesn't necessarily mean that something has to be completed. It's the level of progress I want for it. My day is sort of filled with some meetings, some not. I always build myself into the day a bunch of quiet time. And I compartmentalize largely by having breaks. Once I've done something, I literally get up and go for a walk. And sometimes I either go and just interfere with the rest of the organization and stand over people's desks and have a chat. They hate it. And the other part of it is I literally will just leave the business and go for a walk, have a reset, clear my mind and start on whatever the next issue is. And I put time into the day to allow me to do that. And that's how I really compartmentalize things. Every single piece of work is a separate project. Clear, reset, start, stop, clear, reset. Doesn't always work as perfectly as that, but I try very hard to do that. When I get home, after seeing the family, maybe eating, depending on the time I get home, I then go into my converted garage that I've turned into a bit of a studio and play my bass really badly for hours, getting ready for when the band turns up on the weekend and we play. And so I just spend a lot of time listening to music, playing music, learning new songs, creating stuff, and playing with the band. And that's really my process from week to week. And then I train my son's soccer team. I do some time with them. These are all things that I do to really just split the time up and find different things to do.
Well, it's clearly working for you. You've got 10 years under your belt with HUBBED. You've got over 2,500 locations in Australia alone.
Yep.
Let's go back to 2014. Where did it start?
So I was at Microsoft and I've been there a long time. And if I'm really honest, I was getting to that point where I was being a bit disruptive and not helpful to the organization. I love Microsoft, do not get me wrong. One of the best companies to work for in the world, bar none. But after 15 years, it was just time to do something else. And so I said I left, but I wasn't clear what I was going to do. I had no real idea. And I sat down and thought to myself, well, what do I know? And what I knew was that I'd worked for a really large organization that had been quite dominant in a lot of categories. And sometimes what that can do with some organizations, that position, is that there can be a level of entitlement to that market and to that space. And I'm not sure that's something that I would say Microsoft went through, but you were dominant. So I looked at that and then I thought, well, what do I know? Well, I started as an accountant. I worked in sales and marketing. I ran a logistics operation. I managed the Microsoft Xbox business and the consumer business and its retail business. So I said, well, I know a bit about working in large dominant organizations, and I know the mistakes that companies can make from there, and I know about retail. So what's a large dominant organization that's a retailer that I think has potentially got a bit, happy in terms of their position? And I thought about Australia and comfortable, and I decided, well, that was Australia Post. And then I thought about the retailers that they were putting pressure on, and it was the newsagents. And so I literally went to the board of one of the news agency associations and said, I'm going to write a research paper for you about how I think you should compete with Australia Post and what I think you should do within your business. And I came up with structures around bill payment and parcels and other things. And then I presented it back to them and they said, this is great, but we don't have the capability to execute this. Would you think of anybody who could do it? And I thought, well, I think I could do it. And so I then got a bit of a team around me and started to build out a plan of attack, an approach. And we decided we were going to go and focus on parcels and bill payment and some other services. And we would get this distress channel to come together in a unified way to compete with Australia Post. And it was an unmitigated disaster. We failed. We lost a lot of money, as we started, and we realized that we couldn't really bring this group together in a cohesive way. We didn't have the budget to market ourselves in any way to get people to actually consider an alternative to Australia Post at that point. But what we did find was that the logistics industry liked us, because they were saying, you know what, you've created this distributed network where we can leave our missed deliveries and we can do other parcel services. You've got great tech. If you integrate with us, we think we can give you some parcel volume. And we realized that actually tied to our original vision, which was to have this distress network become more relevant to its community because newspapers aren't doing it anymore. And so to give them parcels, that people had bought online or had a missed delivery and they're able to reconnect with their community via that, we thought was a pretty cool thing for us to be doing. So we then decided to get rid of everything else that we were doing and just focus on this one area. And so we integrated with every courier company, every large or substantial company, except Australia Post. And we did ask to work with them, but they said no. So we worked with Toll, DHL, Couriers Please, FedEx, UPS, Aramex, Sendle. We just connected with everybody. And then we became an alternative network for all couriers who weren't necessarily having access to the Australia Post network. So our business grew on the back of that. But then what happened is we realized that, look, well, really, we're seeing that our business is really around e-commerce parcels. And it's really around giving people alternate delivery options. And so we focused on that and started to build technology for our courier partners so that they could better connect with e-commerce retailers and marketplaces to give their customers access to our network and therefore give them an alternative. And we realized that our unique selling proposition was simply that our opening hours were better than Australia Post outside of business hours. We were all open during business hours, but when it comes to extended hours or weekends, our network was just far superior in terms of its availability to the average consumer. So once we got our heads clear about what we were selling, the issue then became, how do we make sure that customers know that this alternative is there, and how do we make sure that they can trust the experience that they have with us? And so that was really the focus that we put in place as we started to move the business forward.
Have you seen a steady growth with that, or was there a catalyst that kicked things off for customers? I'm thinking COVID probably had a huge impact there.
COVID's a funny one because, and the answer to that question is yes, but COVID's a funny one because everyone would say to me, "Oh, David, you must be doing so well through COVID. Everyone's online." I'd say, yes, but they're also all at home. They're not coming to pick their parcels up. But funnily enough, our network was considered an essential service. So we had a lot of carriers, because there was so much volume, they were having capacity constraints and some of the other issues. And so they were pushing more parcels into our network. So we were seeing growth, not in line with the total growth that the e-commerce industry had, but certainly growth from where we were pre-COVID, which was really surprising to us. We didn't expect that. But what it actually did is it gave a lot of customers an ability to use an out-of-home network. And I think about 67% of Australians have now used an out-of-home network for parcel collection at one point or another throughout the year. So we then realized, hold on, we've got the top carriers actually delivering into our network, and finding that the net promoter score that the customers were getting for click and collect into our network was the highest, because customers had chosen that location. Our technology gave them all the right notifications, and they were happiest with that collection experience. So we said that what we needed to do was realize that we needed to get a lot closer to retailers to sell that message. And in our view, the carriers couldn't do it as effectively as we did. And we had a competitor in the market called Parcel Point, who also, unlike us, had spent a lot of time working directly with retailers. We spent our time working with carriers. So we acquired Parcel Point a couple of years ago, and that gave us an additional muscle because it meant that we were more comfortable talking to retailers. And since that time, Hub now services a bunch of retailers directly, Amazon, the iconic, Shein, Maya, quite a few marketplaces in actual fact. It seems to be an area where we've done really well. So that was really the kicker for us. As soon as we started talking directly to retailers, and it was interesting them saying to us, "I've never heard of you before." And I'd say, well, that's because you've been dealing with Toll and they call it this network, or DHL and they call it something else. It's the same network, it's Hubbed. And we are agnostic, and we can connect with you and work with your existing carriers, even Australia Post. Most of our eBay volume is Australia Post consignments coming into our network, about 90%. So what we've basically done is created this catch-all experience where, regardless of who you ship with, the retailer is able to provide another delivery choice and experience. And as we got our heads around that and started speaking to retailers directly, our volume started to accelerate away. And that's really been over the last, I'd say, 3 years, really, that we've moved away from a pure conversation with carriers and a broader conversation with retailers, and it started that acceleration. There's been another kicker since then, and that's really been on the marketing side, because still I think that HUBBED is this sort of secret that the courier companies have, and they try to rebrand. I'm getting a bit shirty about that, but they try to rebrand as something else. But what we actually do is we have a really frank conversation with retailers, and the logic of it is really simple. And I say to everybody, and I'm using my I'm showing my age now, but I talk about the movie 8 Mile by Eminem. And if you've ever seen that movie, in the very last section of the movie, he's on stage rapping against this major rapper, and he knows this guy's about to annihilate him. So he raps by saying, "I know everything you're about to say about me." And he does this rap, and what happens is the other guy just goes, "I got nothing. I got nothing." And so we started to talk to retailers from that perspective. And so we'd go to them and say, "Let me ask you a question. You know, why is it when I go to your website, there are 10 different ways for me to pay, but only 2 ways for me to get my stuff? You know, you give me 10 ways for you to take my money, but only 2 ways to me to get my stuff. You got Afterpay, B Pay, Any Pay. Why don't you pay? Don't bother pay. And then I can get my stuff fast or slow. Why don't I have more choices?" That's a part of the delivery experience. That's a traditional retail experience. You know that it finishes with that experience. Why don't you give me more choices? And then I say, and I know what you're going to say now, it's expensive. No, it isn't. It's actually cheaper than Australia Post, a lot cheaper. You're going to say the technology is hard. No, it isn't. We've got plugins for all of the major e-commerce platforms, and we've got standard APIs, and we'll work with yours, right? You're going to say it's an operational headache. No, it isn't. If you just want to do click and collect with us, for example, all you're doing is changing the manifest address. There's nothing else to do. You continue your own logistics operations. But if you want to use our returns, here's a better price point than what you're most probably paying now. Well, our customers don't want it. Have you looked at the research? I think you'll find that they do. Well, nobody else is doing this. Then why are we doing so well with Amazon, Shein, Zara, The Iconic? And we just list them out. And it becomes a very easy conversation with retailers to understand that they should have this service. So I say to my team all the time, your job when you're talking to a retailer is to remove all of the exclusions that they're going to come up with as to why they shouldn't do this, and make it very easy and compelling. And what we have found is that those retailers who do use us see an increase in their average cart order value. They see an increase in their net promoter score. And they see, one of the biggest things that we find very interesting is the average order value is higher for a click and collect order than a home delivery. And we think that's got something to do with security and value of parcels being left on the side of the road. So it's become pretty compelling from that point of view. And we're having a bit of a hockey stick moment at the moment, because more and more retailers are jumping on board, and we're spending a lot of time integrating.
Well, you've got the proposition covered. You're growing globally, and more of these sustainable-minded customers or retailers getting on board with the model, that efficiency idea. I think that's really driving that. What's in the works for 2024, and what's in the works for the next decade?
I think there's a couple of things there. You mentioned global. So we now have expanded our networks. We have a network in New Zealand, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, the Philippines. We're turning on another 4 networks in Southeast Asia. And then those are hub networks where we inject our own technology into these out-of-home retail networks for parcel pickup. But what we're also doing is we're connecting with partner networks around the world. And so we're connecting with a network in the UK, and we're currently evaluating which network to work with in the US. What that means is that we can work with global retailers and marketplaces and say to them, once you've connected to us once, we can manage your click and collect and returns or out-of-home delivery services in other markets. And we are doing that. So some of the accounts that we've onboarded in Australia, we're now servicing in Korea, for example, their volume going in via the standard integration that they took on board with us in Australia. So our vision is really to make sure that we can truly provide a global service around collection and returns for our global retail partners, or partners who are looking to move into other markets, and give them a competitive advantage by offering more delivery choices than the competitor. The second thing for us is in relation to our ESG strategy, we really do stick behind our vision, which is to reduce, to improve the sustainability of the last mile. And we believe the way to do that is to move as many consignments for our network as possible, which sounds entirely convenient for us, but according to the Carbon Reduction Institute of Australia, a delivery into our network generates about 0.5 kilo less carbon emissions than a delivery to home. And that's purely because of the consolidation benefit of those items being dropped off and the fact that most people pick their parcels up on an existing journey, on the way to work or on the way home from work. So there's no additional carbon being generated. So we know that this is the greener delivery solution versus home. And our research tells us that customers are looking for that as an alternative. So we're very focused on how much of a sustainable solution we can be and how we can work with our carriers who have challenges in this area of carbon emissions and being more sustainable, how we can better work with them to improve the consolidation to drive down the emissions that e-commerce is creating. And we're pretty proud of what we're doing in that space.
Fantastic. And then what's in the works for 2024?
A couple of things. We look at some of the key solutions that people are looking for. One is sort of box-free, label-free. People want to actually provide a return without any packaging. Just literally bring that item into the network. That's important because A, it reduces packaging, B, it means that we can consolidate all the consignments into one shipment and pass it back to a particular retailer. That's good for the environment and it provides more convenience for the customers. So we're doing a lot of that. We already do print-free across most of our network. We want to expand that to the rest of the network. And then we want to start to create a little bit more sophistication within our network to provide more services. And what I mean by that is some of our network, for example, storage locations, pack and send related, can take larger freight than traditional e-com. So people who don't get access or have to pay quite a bit to get the delivery of something a lot larger can actually deliver that to certain parts of our network where they can pick it up in their car and off they jolly well go. So we're spending a lot of time on that because we're finding that a lot of retailers want that servicing and there isn't a real an effective or cost-effective solution for it at the moment. So we're spending a lot of time on building out those bulky solutions as well. So those are kind of the three things. I tell my team, let's not try and do too many things at any given time. Let's just focus on those because they're immediate and beneficial to the company.
Fantastic. Looking forward to seeing how that all comes to fruition. That's all my questions for you. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.